All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome. Tom Smith, your category buyer for New Zealand, Australia, South Africa here. So today we're going to be getting into a tasting where we've had a lot of new people recently throughout the stores, and it's been a while since we've done something that was really just focused on Australian wine. Australian wine these days is really a moving target. After the collapse of Australian wine in the late aughts, we saw exports really fall to the United States, particularly in the premium category. And additionally, with tariffs imposed by China a couple of years ago on Australian wine, what we've really seen is these things really develop more of a Renaissance atmosphere in Australia right now. Most of the producers we're going to be trying today are founded since the late 90s, so relatively new for the most part. And they really emphasize both an element of bright, fresh, fruit-forward, New World wines, but with an element of experimentation and a playfulness that's really starting to characterize a lot of the wines we're seeing coming out of Australia today. So I wanted to put together a broad overview from regions all over Australia to give you guys an idea of what is going on in Australian wine right now. A great example of that is our first wine today, and that's going to be the Riesling Freak 2021 number 44. John Hughes is the proprietor of Riesling Freak. He grew up on a Riesling vineyard in Clare Valley that his parents owned. When he was at university, he exclusively drank Riesling and earned the nickname Riesling Freak from his friends. He founded Riesling Freak in 2009, and that is all they make, wall to wall. And since then, the wines have been gaining more and more and more acclaim. In 2017, they had a breakthrough year where at the Sydney Wine Show, they literally won every single award for Riesling. They swept all 5 nominations with their lineup. And since then have been named Winery of the Year by both the Rio Review, run by Hugh and Hook, and the Wine Companion, run by James Halliday. So Australian Winery of the Year from 2 different publications in the last couple of years. John makes his wines absolutely with a nod towards German production methods. His wines are picked on weight, and then each of those different lots are moved into different programs based on must weight, just like you would find in Germany. It is night picked, cold fermented at 55 degrees, and bottled after 3 months to really bring home those explosive aromatics. We carry a variety of different Riesling Freak wines right now. This is his Eden Valley, which comes from 3 exceptional vineyards throughout Eden Valley. We're going to be doing an offer on these in just a couple of weeks, but really cool, really exciting Riesling. Next up, we're going to be taking a look at one of my personally favorite Australian wines, and that's the Tabilk 1927 Museum Release Marsanne. Now, Tabilk is one of the oldest continuous producers in Australia. The property dates back to 1860 when it was planted with Syrah and Marsanne clones that were suitcased in from Hermitage. When the current owners, the Purbrick family, bought the property in 1925, the Marsanne was all diseased and not producing, so they ripped it out and decided to replant Marsanne. That same block and those same vines are the ones that are going into this bottling today. They pick really early for low alcohol and really forward acidity, and then they give it about 6 years of bottle conditioning at the winery before they release. I love this wine. It has a lot in common with what you would find in aged Hunter Valley Semillon, that sort of mineral lanolin backbone that makes it super unique and absolutely delicious. I am blown away by this wine every single time I have it. And again, it's a testament to what Tabilk is doing in the Ngambie Lakes region. Today, they are the largest producer of Marsanne anywhere in the world. And it all began with that tiny little block of Marsanne that was planted in 1927, which is the same wine you guys have in front of you today. Cool. Let's continue moving on because there's a lot to get through. Next up on the list is one of a somewhat new wine to us. This is Mandala Yarra Valley Chardonnay. Mandala was started in 1999 by Charles Smedley. He's a wine industry veteran operating in the Yarra Valley. At first, they just started making a little bit of wine off their 10-acre property at Yarra Junction. But in 2015, seeing some success with what they were doing, they went out and bought one of the most recognized vineyards in Yarra, the Dixon's Creek Vineyard. That took their acreage from 10 acres to 110 acres. So now what they are doing is really expanding into export markets like the US. They're starting to land here for the first time. These are classic Upper Yarra Chardonnays. There's lots of acidity, medium to lean body, really great wines. And we had never tasted these in the store yet. I think I was the only person who tasted them before they came in. So I wanted to throw these out for people. This is really, really amazing quality for $24.99. Cool. But moving past that, the next one I would say delivers even more than something like Mandala. Oak Ridge should not be a new name to anybody who has worked here for even a little bit of time. Oak Ridge is our premier Australian direct import. We've worked with them for over 8 years and sat through 3 ownership changes in those 8 years, but the winemaking team has remained intact that entire time. And for me, Oak Ridge is synonymous with David Bicknell. I believe he is the best Pinot Noir and Chardonnay producer in Australia. Hard stop, full stop. The Local Vineyard series is part of their middle tier of wines, where they contract with some of the best vineyards in the Yarra Valley to produce a series of single vineyard wines. And the Chardonnays are exquisite. You guys have probably all had the Henk Chardonnay, which is also from the Upper Yarra. But this is the Willow Lake Vineyard that we also work with a little bit as well. The Willow Lake Vineyard is situated to the far southeast of the Yarra Valley. It doesn't have much fog influence, and it's got almost perfect aspect to really get a little bit more ripeness than you would find in something like the Henk Chardonnay. This is a little bit fuller, and it leans a little bit more towards orchard fruit than citrus fruit that you would find with the Henk as well. But a beautiful expression of Chardonnay, especially at its price. I think Bicknell is just absolutely killing Oak Ridge wines. And my favorite thing about Oak Ridge is they only have one winemaking protocol for every variety that they do. So the Henk is getting the exact same treatment as you would find with the Willow Lake or the Hazeldean or any of their other single vineyard Chardonnays. And the goal, as always, is to really let the site speak through the wines. And if you've had the Henk, you'll be able to contrast and compare these two wines together and see how much of a difference you can get between those two specific sites. Cool. Next on the list this morning was a wine that I had been passionate about for a while and only got the chance to bring in this year. We're going to be returning to Tabilk now. This is the Tabilk Rosé. This is a relatively new wine in Tabilk's over a century history. They started producing this back in 2016 and immediately was acclaimed as one of Australia's best rosés and has held that title since. I think James Halliday has given this 95 points every single year since it began. This is 51% Grenache, 49% Mourvedre. This is all estate fruit, all aged in stainless steel. This is also made with a Provençal rosé technique. in which the cold juice is mixed with nitrogen slowly over a 4-day period to increase texture and mouthfeel, giving it a little bit more weight and a little bit more power and drive on the palate. We don't do a lot of Australian rosé, but I think this is absolutely one of the best ones that is out there. And I'm super excited that we have this at K&L. But yeah, we've been trying to expand and see some other opportunities in the rosé space. Cool. We're going to return to Mandala again with their Pinot Noir. I mentioned before that they started as a 10-acre property and then expanded to 110 acres. Their Pinot Noir is really Charles's soft spot. This comes all from the original Yarra Valley Junction vineyard. And this is absolutely what I would characterize as a stylistic Pinot Noir. Take a look at the color. It's barely there. This is really meant to show off elegance, perfume, and what light extraction Pinot Noir tastes like. It always makes me chuckle that this style is one of the styles that we're seeing more and more often in places like the Sonoma Coast, particularly really hip enclaves of winemakers in the Sonoma Coast. And wines like this, purchased from there, would easily run you anywhere between $60 and $80. But for $30, I think this is a really fantastic alternative to Sonoma Coast Pinot Noir that's pretty gentle. I would throw a chill on this in a second and have it on a warm afternoon. But a really, really cool wine. Again, just something that I wanted to get out in front of people that they hadn't seen before. All right, continuing on to the Pinot portion of our tasting. This is a wine that I am absolutely in love with right now. Again, we brought in the Lethbridge wines after their importer went belly up. And I was a little bit concerned when I saw that all of the Pinot that they were offering was 2015. I saw notes on the producer's website that said, 2 to 3 years cellaring and it's going to be perfect. And I was scared that this wine was going to be tired. Far from it. This wine is absolutely perfect right now. It has all of those kind of tertiary characteristics. It's still got freshness and pop from primary fruit. I think this wine is absolutely jamming. We get customers who come in all the time asking for Old Burgundy, which for the most part doesn't really exist and certainly doesn't exist at a price point like this. I think this is a phenomenal alternative to people who are looking for Pinot Noir with aged character. Of course, this is from Geelong, which is outside of Victoria on the western side of Prince Philip Bay. This is one of the coldest subregions of Victoria and all of Australia. It makes really light-bodied, acid-driven Shiraz and really exceptional Pinot and Chardonnay. But again, I think that wine is an absolute dark horse for anyone out there who likes Pinot Noir. And every time I've had that wine in the last year, it has absolutely blown me away. I love this Pinot Noir.
Hell yeah. That's really cool. That's really cool.
Andrew was going on a vacation recently, and he was up in SF. He's like, "What's one wine you want me to take from your section?" And that was the wine I put in his hand.
Nice.
We have one more Pinot that we're going to check out today. And as opposed to some kind of funkier or newer or different style wines, this is an absolute iconic Australian Pinot Noir. Toll Puddle Vineyard was planted in 1988 in the Coal River Valley subregion of Tasmania. Again, Tasmania is what we consider an emergent region at this point, as climate change continues to affect wine regions around the world. Much like England, we're starting to see climate change nudge really marginal climates like Tasmania right into this perfect spot right now for grape growing. Tolpuddle was eventually purchased by Martin Shaw and Michael Hill Smith MW, the same guys who own Shaw Smith. We'll get to them a little bit later. They purchased it in 2011, and very quickly what they started to see was this wine began winning numerous accolades on a global scale. Today, it is considered probably one of the top 5 Pinot Noirs being made anywhere in Australia. This is 40% whole cluster, 1/3 new French oak, and they only make 2 wines, Estate Pinot and Estate Chardonnay, and both of them are absolutely fantastic. Absolute benchmark Pinot Noir from Australia, and a real good, what's the word I'm looking for? A real good, I don't want to say harbinger, that's not positive. But a wine that is absolutely one of the standout pioneering Tasmanian wines at this moment. But one of those benchmarks I want everyone to kind of check out. And it also has ridiculously high points from just about everyone who's had the chance to try it, if that thing is for you. All right. So one of the areas that's really getting a lot of attention in Australia right now is McLaren Vale, and specifically for its Grenache. Wine Advocate just released a huge report on McLaren Vale Grenache a couple of weeks ago, and we just so happen to have a DI producer based in McLaren Vale that makes what I think is some of the best Grenache being made there today. So this is Ministry of Clouds. I absolutely love their wines. I spent years trying to get them to answer an email from me or pick up the phone from me, and they just didn't think that they had the opportunity to really have international impact with their wines. But luckily enough, I met a broker one day who was next door neighbors with them, and offered to arrange to put me in touch with them and speak to our reputation as a retailer in the United States. We inked a deal, and we're on our 2nd vintage now with them. I think their Grenache is absolutely outstanding. It is from a single vineyard, 100-year-old vines, and that is a $25 Grenache. Where else are you going to find that kind of pedigree at that type of price point? It's flat out impossible. This is done in a mix of stainless steel. Grenache, for those of you who have done some production work with Grenache, would probably know that it tends to get a little oxidative. So you need to keep it in a space between where it's just a little bit reductive and keep it from really developing oxidative flavors later on. So they do a combination of barrel and stainless steel and then blend those back together. This has 10% whole cluster on it. I love the bright candied fruit here. I think this is absolutely a great chillable summer red. And I'm super, super excited that Ministry of Clouds is now starting to get a lot more international recognition for their wines. I feel that in the next couple of years, we're really going to see them start to move to the fore of not just Australian wines, but really make a name for themselves globally. And I'm really excited that they are exclusively working with us through that journey. Next up is another Grenache from McLaren Vale. This one is a little bit different. Rather than a small husband and wife team, Yangara is famously owned by Kendall Jackson, the wine company based here in the United States. Jess Jackson loved Australian wines and fell in love with the Yangara estate on a trip there. He ended up buying the thing outright, making their assistant winemaker the new head winemaker, and then gave them a blank check to do whatever they wanted to do. So this is a old vine plot planted in 1946 right next to their High Sands block, which arguably produces the best Grenache anywhere in Australia. Again, for those of you who are wine nerds out there, I love the production methods on this. So this is certified organic, biodynamic. It's own rooted on sand, bush vines, dry farmed. The wine is hand picked, optical sorted, and loaded into ceramic eggs for fermentation. It sits on the skin for 5 months. And then this is my favorite freaking part. They drain it right into another ceramic egg. This wine is never pressed,
Wow.
which is wild to me. And then it sits for another 5 months, and then is ultimately bottled. But this is a much bigger, more profound and substantive expression of Grenache. This has a lot more in common to me with top examples from the Southern Rhone, whereas the Ministry of Cloud is a little bit more U.S. Grenache, brighter, crunchier, cracklier. Moving on out of Grenache. Grenache is really our transition from medium to full-bodied into full-bodied wines. And we're going to take a look at these now. One of my absolute all-time favorite things is Yarra Valley Cabernet. Now, that is not really a niche of wine because so few people actually do it. But a lot of them do it. Those of them who do it extremely well. So think about Yarra Valley Cabernet and Cabernet blends. Yarra Yering, Timo Meyer, Dominique Porte. These are the elite producers in the Yarra, and only a handful of them make Cabernet. And to be fair, how often do you see Cabernet and Pinot Noir both thriving on the same site? Almost never. The climates typically don't work well for both of them. Now, because Yarra Valley is primarily a location for Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, the Cabernet that is grown there ends up being in a very specific style. It is lighter, lifted, aromatic, can be substantially tannic at some points, and really low in alcohol. This wine is 12.2% ABV, which is pretty astounding. But if you're gonna make a correlation to what's going on with Cabernet in the US, this is not Napa. This is more like Santa Cruz Mountains Cabernet with all that sort of pyrazine pop and aromatic lift to it. And I think those wines are awesome. This is not Cabernet for everybody, but people who look for this type of Cabernet, show this to them and they will be absolutely psyched. Next up, it's been a while since we revisited. This is the last to bilk on our list today. So this is their standard estate Cabernet. This is much, much more traditional Australian Cabernet. This is all estate fruit, all old vines. I think the average, I think the vines are all 19, I think it's 1929 is their entire estate cab block. This is bigger, richer, rounder. There's a mix of both new American oak and new French oak in very small amounts. But this is a grab for someone who is looking for a richer, silkier, full-bodied cab. What else do we have in Cabernet right now at $13.99? Just something I want to point out to people because I think that's an outstanding value wine for the price here. Moving on. It's been so long since we've revisited Leeuwin. And I wanted to give just a brief overview of Leeuwin for anybody who hasn't heard me drone on about them in the past. So Leeuwin was one of the pioneering producers in Margaret River. In 1972, it was started as a joint venture between Robert Mondavi and Dennis Horgan. A climate study was put out in 1971 that attempted to identify untapped wine regions across the world by looking at their climates and comparing it to some of the world's premier climates. Margaret River was one of those areas that had the highest potential for growing Cabernet where nobody was doing it at the time. Robert Mondavi read the study and called up Dennis Horgan, who lived in Perth but owned a small plot of land in the Willie Abrams sub-region of Margaret River at that time, convinced him to put in vines, and they were off to the races at that point. Fast forward to 1979, Decanter put out an article about Leeuwin Estate, giving their Chardonnay its highest recommendation. Now, I want you to just let that sink in for a moment. 1979, Decanter essentially equated the Leeuwin Chardonnay with the best that you would find in Meursault, Puligny, and Chassagne. Literally said it was on equal footing with those wines. And at that time, Margaret River was a place where almost no one was making wines that no one had ever heard of before. And it really sent shockwaves through the entire Western Australia region. It worked to really explode the amount of people who were working in Margaret River at the time. Now there are tons of producers down there churning out absolutely stunning quality wines. The figure I always like to cite is that vineyard area in Margaret River, for all of Australia, it represents about 2% of all vineyard holdings. But Margaret River captures about 25% of Australian wine awards. So you can really see the disproportionate level of acclaim coming from this tiny, super high quality region in the middle of nowhere, Western Australia. The Cab has been an absolute staple for us. It's 2% Malbec, 22 months and 50% new French oak, and a absolutely killer value for a New World style Cabernet Sauvignon. Again, we get that issue all the time when people are like, I'm really looking for a really great Cabernet at $50. Napa, it's getting harder and harder to do that. Look elsewhere. Look at Leeuwin.
That was a beautiful wine.
Thank you. I made it myself.
I know.
No, I didn't.
I could tell.
So, the next wine is a category of wine that I deeply personally struggle with, and that is sparkling Shiraz. Now, typically, I only buy sparkling Shiraz
For two customers.
No, before Easter, because for some god-awful reason, it is traditional in Australia to have sparkling Shiraz with Easter brunch. Go figure. But I would pick up a case or two for our Australian expat customers who were looking to have a traditional Easter brunch, Australian Easter brunch every year. And this year what happened is because of logistics challenges, my usual sparkling Shiraz was nowhere to be found. So I emailed all my vendors and said, I need a sparkling Shiraz. Bring them to me. And I staged this mini Australian sparkling Shiraz tasting for myself up in San Francisco. The Flegenheimer was the one that won the day. And good Lord, to my surprise, it has been selling really well. And I don't get it. I don't understand why. But I love that people are buying it. I love that people are interested in it. It's a really funky, distinctive, out there wine that you are not going to find anywhere but Australia. And I'm psyched that people are getting into it. So people keep buying it, and staff keep asking me, like, what is this? What does it taste like? So I wanted to get that in front of you guys so that when people inevitably bring this up to you and ask, how is this? You guys can give your opinion on what it is.
I'm going to drink it next Easter brunch.
And the Flegenheimer is certainly a lighter brighter style of Australian Shiraz. There are definitely some really weighty, sugary styles. This one, I like that it's lighter, brighter, and lifted. All right, next up, we're getting into the Shiraz portion of our tasting today, starting things off with Shaw Smith. This is, again, the same two gentlemen who started Toll Puddle in 2011. Shaw Smith is a separate label that focuses specifically on Adelaide Hills. Adelaide Hills is just outside the city of Adelaide, nestled in the foothills of the Mount Lofty Ranges. It is one of the coolest subregions in South Australia and is really known more than anything for Sauvignon Blanc and Riesling. But they also make a fair amount of Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, and Shiraz as well. The Shiraz that is made there is, again, done in a lighter, brighter, more lifted style that focuses more on aromatics than weight and drive. Shaw Smith was one of the earliest premium producers to move into the Adelaide Hills. Now they are one of the most respected producers in all of South Australia. We did an email on this a little while ago, but it got 98 points by Decanter. For everyone who thinks Australian Shiraz is just one thing, this is the counterpoint to that. And for people who really love Northern Rhone expressions of Shiraz and can't stomach the price on Cote Rôtie these days, this is also an excellent alternative to that as well. Next up, because we got to keep moving, we're going to hop to the Coriol Estate. Coriol's another one of the DIs in our program that I absolutely love. It's been owned by the Lloyd family, who purchased the old Chaffee's Hill vineyard in the 1950s. The Coriol Estate Shiraz is entirely from their estate, from the old vines that were planted back in 1967. This is 25% new French oak. Our pricing on this right now is absolutely ridiculous. I think it's something like $13.99. But this is something, again, that's a grab for someone who's looking for something a little bit more along the lines of traditional Australian Shiraz. It's big. It has power. It has texture and smoothness to it as well. But again, I absolutely love what Coriol does, and I think their flagship Estate Shiraz is one of the better values on full-bodied wines in the store right now. Moving on again, because we are getting real close to it now, one of another iconic producers out of Australia that, again, isn't necessarily a traditional style of Shiraz, but is still exceptionally well made and acclaimed for what it is. So this is Clonakilla. Clonakilla, meaning the meadow of the chapel, is a product of an Irish family that moved to Australia back in the 1960s. John Kirk, the current owner's father, established their estate vineyards in the region of Canberra, which most of you probably are not super familiar with. Canberra is actually the capital of Australia, and what's really distinctive about it as a wine region is that it has continental climate. It's way inland, about halfway in between Sydney and Melbourne. And when they started, they were the only people producing wine there. Again, after decades of acclaim for their wines, more and more people have started moving to the region, and we're seeing a lot more production of top quality Shiraz from Canberra today. Now, as opposed to lots of other Shiraz being made in Australia, the Kirk family is really focused intently on making wines that speak to the Northern Rhone. Their flagship is a co-ferment of both Estate Shiraz and Estate Viognier. The O'Riada is named after an Irish folk singer who actually happened to be cousins with John Kirk, Sean O'Riada. The Oreata, the only difference between this and their flagship is the Oreata is sourced from some neighboring vineyards as well. Again, huge scores, tons of acclaim. This is a producer that is intently focused on quality above all else. They flat out just didn't make any 2020. There was so much smoke during the fires that they said, we're not even going to try. We don't want to stake our reputation. We don't even want to attempt to make something with poor product. And they scrapped the entire vintage and are going to be selling completely out of their library in the next couple of years when that vintage is up. But another really cool benchmark Shiraz. One of the 20 Shirazes that is listed in the Langdon's classification as exceptional, which means it's, there are 22 wines in Langdon's exceptional category. 11 of them are Shiraz, and Clonakillar is one of them. So we're talking about the absolute top Australian Shiraz. Next up is a wine that is really near and dear to my heart. I really love O'Leary Walker. It was founded pretty recently in 2000 by David O'Leary and Nick Walker. They were both long-time wine industry veterans who mainly focused on super high volume, high value wines. They decided in 2000 to come together to try their hand at making boutique premium wines based primarily out of the Clare Valley, but a number of other locations as well. But they are located in Clare. This is an estate vineyard from them in the Polish Hills subregion. I love Clare Valley Shiraz. It has a density, it has a structure and a texture to it that makes it really distinctive for me from Barossa Shiraz. When this wine was originally shopped to me, had 0 points, had nothing going for it, had never been in the US, and I tried it and loved it so much, I could not buy this wine. And if you have a sec, if it's still in your glass, take one more sip. What I really love is there's this like beautiful back mid-palate sweetness that just swings in at the very end, doesn't dominate the palate at all, and really just leaves this crisp, beautiful, resonating finish. I love that wine. We still have club pricing on it. But again, just want to remind people for something, we get our heads wrapped up in points sometimes. That's just a wine that I think is inherently delicious, drinkable, and great quality for how much it costs. All right, moving on to the last wine of today's tasting. I wanted to end things off with another big classic. This is Yalumba's Signature. Yalumba is one of the first names in Australian wine. They have been continuously producing wine since the 1840s and are now on their 6th generation. They are, for better or worse, the Robert Mondavis of Australia. They were the first people to put an on-site cooperage in their winery in the Southern Hemisphere, period. They're so concerned with quality that they literally import staves from Hungary and France and then actually cooper them, toast them, and assemble them on site at the winery. As I said before, this wine has been made since 1967. It is a classic combination of Cabernet and Shiraz. It's one of those things that is distinctly Australian, but it actually makes a really phenomenal combination. Cabernet gives aromatics and it gives structure. Shiraz gives mid-palate fullness and sweetness. Look no further than when Côte Rôtie was grapes from Côte Rôtie and Hermitage were being sailed up the Rhone River into Bordeaux to be blended with Bordeaux in rough Bordeaux years. There's tons of reasons why these two varieties should be together and make great bedfellows. This is an absolute classic. This is 33% new French oak and considered one of the most classic high-end Australian wines that you're going to find anywhere on the continent. So I hope that was a good overview. I wanted to get into a lot of different regions and a lot of different varieties and give people a broad overview of what our selections look like in Australian wine today. I would hope that you guys keep some of the stories in mind, share some of those with customers as they come through, and help not only people who are looking for Australian wines in particular, but people who are simply looking for delicious, inherently drinkable, fantastic reds that really show value at their price point. So I hope you guys keep these on the top of your brain and get them into customers' hands. I really appreciate your time. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Woo!